We're in a recession today. People ignore the warnings. Stock market collapse that I would expect in association with a severe recession. Greatest bubble of all time. When it comes to your own money, the warning signal that you're the biggest victim. You can see these things coming if you know where to look, but most people don't. So the standard definition of a recession.
Welcome.
Everyone's concerned about inflation, but there's a big backstory there. But I always say when it comes to your own money, everybody has a PhD in economics. You don't need Larry Summers to tell you what's going on with your budget and your ability to feed your family or keep a roof over your head. So people get inflation. It's one of the reasons it's so politically toxic is because it's unavoidable. You can't fudge it. You can't spin it. It's like, hey, if I used to fill up my Ford F-150 truck for $50 and now it's $125, A, you get it. It's right in your face. And B, that's $75 that you don't have to take your spouse out to dinner, buy a new jacket or whatever. So there's kind of demand destruction at the same time you're spending more money on the one thing you can't do without. So people get it. But then from there, the question I get the most is, hey, Jim, is this going to cause a recession? Are we going to have a recession? And as recently as a few months ago, I would say, yeah, I think so. You can see it coming late this year, early next year. Now I say, we're in a recession. I mean, it's not coming, we're in it. So the standard definition of a recession is 2 consecutive quarters of declining GDP. There are a few more bells and whistles having to do with unemployment and a few other things, but that's the rule of thumb. So based on that, and based on the best available estimate for a second quarter, likely to be accurate, we're in a recession today. Now, it's not severe, but that's like saying I'm in bed with pneumonia, but I'm not dying. Well, okay, but we're in a recession right now. So we haven't really seen the market collapse, stock market collapse that I would expect in association with a severe recession has not happened yet. This is just going to play out. It'll get worse as the year goes on.
All right, so you're expecting a major correction in stock markets on the back of a recession.
Yeah, I'm not alone. I mean that is my expectation. I have my own models and I look at it closely. But if you listen to Michael Burry, Jeremy Grantham, Charlie Munger, these people have been around and they run hundreds of billions, and they're saying the same thing. So I mean, Jeremy Grantham did so every now and then someone will throw some statistic at me and I go, how long is your time series? And I go, oh, we took it back 5 years. I was like, talk to me if you've done it for 100 years, because that's a little more meaningful. But Jeremy Grantham actually did do a 100-year time series and looked at bubbles all over the world, 1929 US, 1989 Japan, 2000 dot-com stocks, and many others. And he said he's never seen anything like it. It's a triple greatest bubble of all time times 3 in the sense that it's real estate, stocks, and other asset classes. So I do, that is my view, but it's shared by a number of other analysts. We're almost certainly in a recession now. The recession will get worse. So that's not priced into the markets, but you don't even have to guess. That's here. It's going to get worse. The question is, are we in for a financial panic? That's kind of what you were referring to, Brian. And the evidence is yes. The evidence is right in front of your face if you know where to look, but most people don't. It's a little bit technical. I can explain it in plain English, but the signs are there. But then there comes a time when the word gets out that you're the biggest victim, at which point you're the marlin and the old man in the sea. The sharks come at you. The street doesn't care about the market anymore. They systematically trade against you. The best description of a financial crisis I've ever heard is everybody wants her money back. Like, that's the easiest way to understand it. It's not like, this asset's bad, I'm out of this, I'm going into that, or I'm rotating out of this sector, getting into that sector, or no, it's like everybody wants his or her money back now. And so all asset classes behave the same way. They all go down and all the spreads widen, and they keep widening until either there's a sequential financial failure, which was happening in 2008, by the way, just to jump ahead to that, or you shut every market in the world. We came within hours of closing every market in the world in 1998. 1929, everyone was like, October, I think 18th or 19th, it was late October 1929, the stock market fell 22% in 2 days. It wasn't one day, it was like 12% one day, 11% the next day, so 23% over 2 days. But that wasn't the crash. I mean, that was the beginning of the crash. This Dow Jones fell 82% from top to bottom. Now, it took 3 years. It bottomed in June 1932. Started in October 1929, so not quite 3 years. But that fell 82%. And that happens. So yeah, we're down, NASDAQ's down, bounced back a little bit in recent days, down close to 30%, down, the S&P down over 20%. We're in bear market territory, but that's just the beginning. That's not what a full bear market, full market adjustment looks like in the face of the kind of recession that I expect. And the psychology was, if you needed a TV set or refrigerator, new car, whatever, you say, I better buy it now because the price is going to be higher. If I wait a month or 2 months, the price is going to run away from me. So it had huge behavioral effects. Of course, gold was, going to the moon. There was a lot going on at the time. But Brian, you're right when you say we're putting up inflation numbers today that are the highest in 40 years. That is correct. A little 41, actually it was 1981 before we saw these numbers. But I remind people, the inflation in 1981 was the end of a 10-year period of inflation. It wasn't the beginning. You say, that's some inflation. Yeah, we did, but it had started. I mean, some ways it started in 1968 and it really took off in 1974, 75. So 81, these numbers, that was when Volcker finally got it under control. But you go back to 80, 70, between 77 and 81, so that 5-year period, the dollar lost 50% of its purchasing power, not 15, 50 in that 5-year stretch. So you were putting up numbers, 10%, 11%, 13% and higher year after year. Yeah, 1981, it was 9 or 10, which is what they're comparing it to today. That is my view. I'm happy to explain it. And it catches a lot of people by surprise. They're like, wait a second, Jim, it's inflation. You just look at 2022, starting in January, it was kind of like 7%. Then it was, it's 8.1, it's 8.6, now it's 9.1, which is true. That is the series. It is going up. So people extrapolate that. And again, there is this comparison to the 70s. By the way, I think the situation we're in today is very different from the 1970s, and I'll explain why. But, I'll explain why right now, because in the 70s, it was triggered from the supply side with first the Arab oil embargo in 1973 as a result of the 1973 Arab-Israeli war. And then the price tripled, but it went from like $2 to $6. Okay. But percentage terms, that's a huge jump, but it was still $6. And then it got to 12. And then in 1979, you had a second oil embargo because of Iran and the Ayatollah and the revolution and the hostages and all that. And then it went from kind of 12 to 20. So oil went up by a factor of 10 in the course of the late 70s because there's two different embargoes. So that's coming from the supply side. But what happened was, the other source of inflation is on the demand side. So you have what's called cost push inflation. That's where supplies choked off, or there's an embargo, or there's a shortage, natural disaster, a lot of things. It's coming from the supply side, and demand is inelastic, so you just pay up or kind of do without. But the demand side is much more psychological. That's called demand pull inflation. That's when consumers behave the way I described, and as I say, I lived through the 70s, where hey, I better buy it today, I better buy it now. You're pulling all this demand forward and bidding up prices because you're worried that it's going to get even worse. So as that applies to today, we are starting with the cost push inflation, mainly the price of energy, but the price of food is a big factor. And of course they're related. It's like here's the energy, here's the food. Where do you think the food comes from? To get the food, you got to feed the pigs and cows. What do you feed them? You feed them corn. How do you get corn? Well, you grow it on a farm. You need nitrogen fertilizer. You need diesel in your tractors. You get the food. You got to put it in a truck to get it from point A to point B. That requires diesel. The higher the diesel price, the higher the cost of food because you're moving it by truck, etc. So these things, as I say, are linked. But food prices are going up substantially, and the two things you can't do without are gas in the car and food. So you have that cost push inflation. We're not quite at the stage where it's demand pull. We're not quite at the stage where individual consumers are behaving the way I described in the 1970s, saying, hey, better spend the money fast because it's losing value. And you see that in inflationary expectations and inverted yield curves. And I'll come back to that because that's a really big deal. If you thought inflation was going to run away, as it did in the 70s, yield curves would be steeply sloping and people would be in a frenzy to buy stuff. They're not. And the yield curves are not sloping, or upward sloping, they're inverted, they're going down. That tells you that, and we also see this in inflationary expectations. Inflationary expectations don't drive inflation here and now. A couple points. Number one, you can see these things coming if you know where to look, but most people don't. Number two, they take a while to play out. So you get plenty of warning, but again, people ignore the warnings. And then finally, and it's important to understand there's a difference between a financial crisis and a recession. They're both bad, but they're two different things. 1998 was a severe financial crisis, but there was no recession. The NASDAQ hit an all-time high on January 1st, 2000. It went on for another year and a half, and there was no recession. 1990, 91 was an example of a recession, but no financial crisis. Some losses in commercial real